In my last video, I reviewed the Elk SD64. This is an add-on for the Acorn Electron that allows users to load and save games using an SD card as a storage medium. This, and many other devices like it, are implemented roughly along these lines. There's some custom electronics to connect the modern SD card interface to the vintage computer bus. And there's software that accompanies the device, usually on a built-in ROM, to extend the computer's operating system so that it can access the files via said electronics. The device I'm going to be reviewing today takes a rather different approach. Most computers of the day had a cassette interface that could connect to a Commodore Garden cassette recorder to load and save games. Typically, this would be in the form of a lead to connect the computer to a cassette recorder. Audio cassettes would be used as a storage medium, and data would be stored on the cassettes as a series of noises. These noises, in layman's terms, would represent the zeros and ones of the saved binary data, for example, game code or a loading screen. What if, rather than designing bespoke hardware for each computer, you emulate that cassette deck instead and take advantage of the ready-made interface? And here it is, the TZXduino, sometimes referred to as the Arduino tape, Kazduino or Maxduino, but they're all essentially the same thing. The components are rather minimal. All you need is an Arduino, a power source, a handful of buttons, an SD card board, an SD card, a display of some kind, and a 3.5mm jack socket. All of the heavy lifting is done by the software on the Arduino, which is freely available. Its input is emulator files stored on the SD card, for example Spectrum tap files, and the output is the screechy tape noise you get as if you were playing the original cassette in a cassette player with the volume turned up. Clearly there's a disadvantage to this. Unlike the devices that connect to a computer's peripheral ports, this loads in real time, which means you may need to wait a few minutes before you get to play that favourite title on the Spectrum. And another potential disadvantage is that it can only be used to load. There is no facility for saving data back out onto the SD card. But there is one massive advantage. It's device agnostic. I use mine mostly for Spectrum games, but as far as I'm aware, the TZXduino software also supports loading emulator files into the ZX80, the ZX81, Acorn Electron, BBC Micro, Amstrad CPC and the Jupiter Ace. And there are alternative firmwares that will allow you to use the hardware to load on machines like the Dragon 32 and the MSX series. Most of these devices work along the same lines. Load the SD card up with games on your PC and then slot the card into the board. Plug the device into your vintage computer, power it up. I'm using a USB battery pack here to do that, and then navigate to the file using the on-screen menus. I've organised mine by publisher, so let's go into Ocean. Not Chase HQ. Armageddon, that's an old game. Cobra, a classic. Type in the relevant load command on your vintage computer. So in the case of the Spectrum, it'd be load quote quotes. Or if you've got a Spectrum 1 to 8 and above, select loader from the browser that appears when you power the machine up. And then once that's initiated, press the play button on the TZXduino. And it really is that simple. I'll demonstrate it loading on a real Spectrum in a moment.
If you search online for TZX Duino, you may come across this creation. It's a TZX Duino crammed into a cassette case. It's by one of my Twitter friends, Jam Hamster, who delights in making unusual creations like this. It's a complete TZX Duino, including a battery, display, buttons, and a cassette head, so that it can emulate a cassette, and is primarily designed for use in computers with built-in cassette decks, like the ZX Spectrum Plus 2. I'll hand over to Jam Hamster to demonstrate.
We have power, we've got display, we have buttons. Nice. Does it actually work? That's the thing. And that's a yes.
So you can see here it's quite similar to a standard TZX Duino. There's a power source, there's a battery up at the top, a display in between the spools, and some buttons arranged around the spools. They're depressed when you push the case in slightly. There's an Arduino Nano and an SD card on the left hand side. There's one major difference. Rather than having a 3.5mm jack to output the audio's piped through to a tape head you can see at the bottom, and this makes contact with the tape head in the cassette recorder in order to transfer the audio across, a bit like those CD cassette adapters you used to get in the 80s. I think this is a really ingenious piece of engineering. I'll put a link into the description for the full video. Another of my Twitter friends, Ollie Wilkinson, aka Evolutional GD, is taking that one step further and putting the whole shebang on a motherboard. As you can see here, it looks rather tasty. This is very much a work in progress, but keep watching this space.
So how does this work in practice then? Well, I've got my TZX Duino here, connected to my Spectrum Harlequin clone via the ear socket, using the standard Spectrum stroke ZX81 cassette leads that you get in the box. The Harlequin's powered, and I've got the game that I want to play already loaded on the SD card. I think we're going to go for Cobra. So I'm going to start the load process off on the Spectrum by selecting loader from the menu. Insert tape. Well, we're in a cassette free future, so I am going to select Cobra from the menu. There it is, and press play. And there we go. The familiar loading noise. So you can see here one of the disadvantages coming into play. It is real time, and it will take as long to load Cobra off a TZX Duino as it would off a cassette. But at the same time, you get the nostalgic noise, so it's not all bad. That was a bit of a worry there. I thought it had broke. It's one of those clever loaders which doesn't load into memory sequentially. And we've got a countdown as well, which is great. It's a really nice loading picture, that. You look at loading pictures like that and you think, How did they do that, considering the Spectrum's colour layout, screen layout? And I think at this point we will fast forward to nearer the end. So a couple of minutes have elapsed, and the countdown's now gone past the 100 mark. So we should be able to play our game shortly. At least we don't get the R-Tape loading error much with these devices. And bingo, there we go. Let's have a quick game, it'd be rude not to. So, there we have it. Loading a Spectrum game in a post-cassette future. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you like what I'm doing, then please subscribe to my channel. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching.